Sometimes the real story of a workplace doesn't unfold in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones, the places where support should exist and doesn't. In those first weeks, hope and benefit of the doubt can blur what's really happening. Hello again, I'm Kelvin, with Uncommon Sense Lab. Back with the psychology of a dysfunctional workplace. We're with Abigail again, and she's going to walk us through her first weeks inside the organization. These early weeks reveal 3 little-known workplace behavior patterns that we'll track throughout her story. First, ego-driven leadership. When a leader's identity becomes more important than their people, they choose visibility over effectiveness, and typically choose control over coaching. Next, organizational socialization. How a new employee learns a company's norms, expectations, and way of working. When it's weak, new hires can pick up bad habits instead of gaining clarity in the role. And finally, leader-member exchange. The quality of the relationship between a manager and each employee, and how differences in access or support can shape someone's experience. Abigail didn't have these terms at the time. She only had what she lived. So let's go back to where her first week began. Corporate onboarding. What did she walk into? So Abigail, let's pick up where we left off. You mentioned you felt some awkwardness in that final interview, but you overlooked it and accepted their offer. So after the averted travel mishap, you finally get to the corporate office to start your first week. Take us into week 1. What did those first days look like?
Honestly, I flew in that Monday morning excited. I wanted to do well. I wanted this job to be the start of something steady. And the first day felt fine. A little loose, but fine. The only thing that stood out immediately was when I finally walked into my new boss's office to meet her. The first thing I noticed was a huge desk sign that said, "Boss Woman." I didn't overthink it. I just clocked it. A tiny data point.
That's actually a really common early clue. Not evidence of a problem, but a signal. In workplace psychology, we see that when leaders center their identity heavily around being the boss, it can point to patterns of ego-driven leadership. Not inherently good or bad, but it does shape how a team learns, communicates, and interprets expectations. And even if you didn't have language for it yet, you noticed it.
Right, I noticed it, but like you said, it was a signal and not necessarily a red flag. But, from there, the week settled into a pretty odd routine. Every morning, I'd get to the office before my manager. When she finally got there, she ushered me to some internal meeting she set up for me, and after I would head back to her office and sit there and wait for her to return. And then by 11:30, we were out the door for a long lunch. And every lunch included several drinks. And I'm not judging it, I drank too, even though I don't usually drink during the workday. At first, I thought it was a get-to-know-the-new teammate thing. But by the 3rd day, it was clear this wasn't to get to know each other. This was just what she did. After lunch, we'd go back to the office for a bit, maybe an hour or so, and after that, my manager would head home for the day. I'd Uber back to the hotel by myself.
And that's where organizational socialization comes in. Healthy onboarding teaches you the work, the culture, the expectations, what success looks like. It's not hovering. It's presence, structure, and real support. What you got wasn't socialization. It was absorption into habits. Long drinking lunches during the workday, minimal structure, training that didn't build toward anything. That gap between what you needed and what you got is an early sign you weren't being set up with real support.
Yeah, and on top of that, she had set up several internal meetings for me. And in one of them, someone hinted that there were things going on with my boss, but didn't explain what, just said we'd talk later. It was strange, but I brushed it off again.
So you fly home after that week. What happens next?
I still felt hopeful. It was a strange week, but I thought things would tighten up once I was back in my territory. On my first day home, I logged into everything, or tried to. There were many tools and I was having issues signing into all of them, so half my morning went to fixing that with the IT department by phone. Once I was in, I was working. Mapping my territory, emailing schools, scheduling visits, just moving through everything I knew how to do. Then I realized one of my contacts wasn't listed in the system, and since I couldn't add him myself, I sent my manager a screenshot and asked if she could have him added before my meeting with him the following week. And then, nothing. No response. Assuming she was just busy, I kept going. In week 2, I had 4 appointments, including one at the biggest school in my area. The demo went well and they wanted pricing. I was very excited. As soon as I got back to my home office, I immediately sent my boss an email about the meetings that I had that day, again, thinking she'd be thrilled. She didn't answer, but she did send a meeting invite for later that week, so I held on to that. In that meeting 2 days later, she gave good advice. She shared some really helpful context about the K-12 space, and I appreciated it. At the end of the call, she asked me to send her my follow-up emails for review before I sent them to the schools. I already had them written. I'd been waiting for almost a week to send them, so I forwarded them to her right after we hung up. And then, nothing. No review, no guidance. No signal to move forward. I assumed she'd reply by end of day. Then another week went by and still nothing.
This is where socialization and leader-member exchange collide. You took initiative, but the support wasn't there. A manager asking for follow-ups then going silent isn't helpful. It's a sign of inconsistency.
By week 3, schools were getting ready for exams and winter break, so things slowed down. I started talking more with my remote teammates across the country, and I kept hearing the same things, that it takes a long time to get approvals, and turnover was very high on the team. I also shouldn't expect fast answers and, if possible, figure things out on my own. Others talked about serious internal issues. It was the first time I realized it wasn't just me experiencing a lack of support. Other people were hinting at problems too. I started to see that I might not be confused. The system was.
That moment is big, because when employees start realizing they aren't the problem, it opens the door to seeing the actual structure. Here, what you were describing wasn't personal. It was weak organizational socialization, inconsistent leadership, and uneven access to support. All structural patterns. And then there's the leader dynamic, a manager who centered her identity heavily around being the boss. Not necessarily wrong on its own, but it can shape how the entire team functions. And that's where we will end it today. Next time, we're going to dig into what happened after the holiday break, and how the truth of how dysfunctional this workplace would finally reveal itself. One last thing before we close. Abigail didn't know it yet, but she was already halfway through her entire time at this company, 8 weeks total, and the second half is where everything became unmistakable. We'll get into that in the final episode. This has been Kelvin with Uncommon Sense Lab, and if you want something to hold you over until episode 3, we've got plenty of shorts on workplace dynamics you can check out. We'll see you next time on The Psychology of a Dysfunctional Workplace.